I have seen person after person who I personally knew and admired and thought were different do complete 180s. I have known Marco Rubio since he was very young. I've known Pam Bondi for decades. She and I were friends. We'd kiki, we'd, together, we'd gossip, we'd drink together. So many people in Congress, so many people that are serving in this administration, so many people that I see on TV defending the indefensible and the unjustifiable because it means they have access to power. But the question is, are you willing to compromise every principle you supposedly stood for, every conviction you supposedly had, every belief you supposedly held in order to stay in that circle of power?
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast, and today we're going to be talking to someone who is steeped in Florida politics and knew Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi before any of the Trump madness sucked them into his orbit. I'm talking about Ana Navarro, the Republican operator who is just bewildered by what has happened to the Republican Party under Trump. And she has opinions on everything. You should hear her opinion on Kristi Noem and Lewandowski, and she doesn't care that the two of them fucked. What she cares about is what else Kristi Noem has fucked. Stay tuned for that. She's got literally eye rolls on almost everything that's going on right now. But having grown up in Nicaragua and a dictatorship, she also has real concerns about the Republic of the United States. She's not only the co-host of ABC's The View, but she's the mom of Cha-Cha, and she's just started her own podcast, which I highly recommend, called Bleep, because, well, frankly, she needs to be bleeped a lot. Let's get into it. Right, so I'm so excited to have prized you out of the studio of The View and your own studio for Bleep, your new podcast, to talk about everything, because I know you have an opinion on everything, and I definitely want to talk about what on earth is going on in Florida and Marco Rubio and DeSantis and all that. But first, we are 12 days into a war, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense/War, as he would have it, has issued a decree that photographers who don't take flattering photos of him are no longer welcome at the Pentagon. We wrote a very good story on it at the Daily Beast, and the headline was Mirror, Mirror, and about this vanity move of his. But what do you think of that? 12 days into a war.
Well, remember also what he did last year, which was to ban some of the long-standing Pentagon correspondents, media correspondents from the Pentagon, and replace them with basically MAGA bloggers or whatever it was.
Right, and he banned the AP, right?
Yeah, I mean, and so the attacks on the press by this administration, whether it's Trump himself or cabinet members, have been endless, and it's been from the beginning. And I think as we are in the middle of a war, and I'm glad we're calling it what it is, because I saw that Trump was calling it an excursion. I wonder if he knows what that word means, because for me, an excursion is like a field trip, right? I think he meant incursion, but either or, it's not an incursion and it's not an excursion. It's a fucking war. So let's call it what it is. And here we are. This guy threw us into war after saying that this is precisely what he wasn't going to do. And this tells you how tragic it is that in this second term, he has surrounded himself by all of these yes men and women who are not only unqualified when it comes to experience and knowledge, but also have no moral compass, are vain, and know that their only qualification that they have to keep up is kowtowing and brown-nosing to Donald Trump. So what a difference it would make to have a John Kelly
right
at DHS or in the White House. What a difference it would make to have Mad Dog Mattis, running Department of Defense, instead of this guy who seems to relish and take glee in dropping drones off the coast of Venezuela and showing us video game type footage of dropping drones on missiles, on ships laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. It's, and his braggadocious self. I guess I'm so disgusted by Pete Hegseth that the idea that he's banning people because they take unflattering pictures of him is like one of the lesser evils. When I start to think about all the things, the fact that this Department of Defense, or aptly called Department of War, has taken illegal military action. Every military expert has said dropping those drones on civilians off the coast of Venezuela and now in the Pacific was an illegal act. And they keep doing it with impunity. And this Congress, which has the Republicans have ceded their duty of oversight, their duty of providing military approval of operations, they seem to have no issue with it. We've now killed 156 people with these drones on these ships in Latin America. All indications are the U.S. killed over 150 schoolgirls in Iran.
Right.
And it bothers me greatly that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are trying to gaslight the American people and, continue saying, oh, we're conducting an investigation, instead of acknowledging it as a, tragic, horrible mistake and apologizing for it. Something needs to distinguish us, as the good guys from the bad guys.
Someone told me that the school, which was next to a sort of depot for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the assumption was, because they'd looked at this through Western eyes, that the school would be closed because it was a Saturday when they started. So they knew there was a school there, but because they were just looking at this through American eyes with no understanding of the culture on the ground when the school was open, because it was a Saturday and kids in Iran go to school on a Saturday, they didn't realize it would be open. And you think they got rid of...
They should say that, right?
Well, they should say that, and they got rid of all the experts at the Pentagon who know about Iran, and now we've got Pete Hegseth, who doesn't want an unflattering photo of himself. That's his priority.
Well, and also we found out today about the things he's been spending millions and millions of taxpayer dollars on.
Right.
$2 million on snow crab legs.
Right, because he loves snow crab legs.
Who doesn't?
Right.
But I pay for my own.
Right. Right. No, that's absolutely shocking, the expenses that they run up at the end of the year to make sure that they can get the equivalent budget for the following year. He spent on the most frivolous things, not least steak and crab claws.
But it's just, it's just so appalling at a time when Americans can't afford health care, when Americans are being kicked off the SNAP program, that you have Donald Trump spending hundreds of millions on a ballroom that nobody needed, talking about building the arch to Trump in Washington, D.C., making himself so wealthy. I mean, there's just so many things that I think just shock the conscience. And I'm glad that we continue to talk about them. I'm glad you bring them up, because one of my greatest fears is that we all get numb to this, because it's just such a daily barrage of ignominious things that it's hard to keep up with this hamster wheel of absurdity.
Let me tell you about this clever way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinks with friends. It's called ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink, and it's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic invented by PhD scientists. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel like yourself the next day. March is packed with social plans, so don't wait, act now. Go to zbiotics.com/dailybeast and use code dailybeast at checkout for 15% off your first order. And if you're not satisfied, they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. So, You were a Republican. You worked for Jeb Bush. You live in Florida, which is still sort of, the bubbling cauldron of Republicanism in a way. How do you square what has happened to the Republican Party, the hijacking of it by Donald Trump? And does it survive after Donald Trump leaves?
Listen, I don't square away. I have seen person after person who I personally knew and admired and thought were different do complete 180s. I have known Marco Rubio since he was very young. We're the same age. We grew up in Republican politics in South Florida. I've known Pam Bondi for decades since she was Attorney General of the state of Florida. She and I were friends. We'd kiki, we'd, together, we'd gossip, we'd drink together. Lindsey Graham, I knew him when he was John McCain's wingman, not Donald Trump's. He's a completely different person than he is today. So many people in Congress, so many people that are serving in this administration, so many people that I see on TV defending the indefensible and the unjustifiable because it means they have access to power. And let's be clear, the trappings of power are very attractive. It's great to be invited to the White House. It's great to be able to go to the Christmas parties. It's great to be able to ride on Air Force One and be able to call up the White House and talk to whomever you want. All of those things are heady things. I know, I've done them. But the question is, are you willing to compromise every principle you supposedly stood for, every conviction you supposedly had, every belief you supposedly held in order to stay in that circle of power? I mean, the Marco Rubio I see now, and Marco is one of the...
Yeah, tell me about Marco. How did he do that 180? I mean, we saw him standing next to Trump in the debates, arguing against him. How did he become his Secretary of State, doing exactly what Trump appears to want?
They all did it, right? I mean, think about the 2016 campaign. Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, all of them harpooning Trump and calling Trump for what he was, a con man and a grifter. And they've all turned around because they're ambitious for their own. I mean, there's two ways to exist in the Republican Party right now. Either you are a Trumper and you approve and say and defend everything he says and does, and that benefits your political career, or you're not, and you're probably going to lose your primary, or you're not, or you're going to retire, or you're just not going to be part of the think about Mitt Romney. Where is Mitt Romney?
Right.
Nowhere. Think about Jeb Bush. Where is Jeb Bush? Nowhere to be heard from.
Right.
And so the only way to continue being in elected office or in appointed office in this Republican Party is if you come along and become a Trump acolyte, which all of them have been willing to do. And those who have not been willing to do so are no longer relevant or in politics.
What's the conversation like when Trump's not in the room, when they're all together? Because they know they've all done this, right? Marco Rubio understands his journey, doesn't he? Doesn't Lindsey Graham understand that he went from calling Trump, Fruit Loops to now he's encouraging him to go into Cuba? That's his latest thing. Do they have this conversation with each other when the press isn't in the room? Are they saying, "Oh my God, he's lost his mind, he's crazy, how can we contain him"?
I don't think so. I think the only way that Marco can look at himself in the mirror is by convincing himself that he believes this, by convincing himself that by him doing the things, completely changing his convictions the way he has regarding Trump, that by him doing that, selling his soul basically, he's been able to achieve some good things, which I think he believes getting rid of Maduro is a good thing. I think he believes, a dead Ayatollah is a good thing. I think he believes that the possibility of regime change in Cuba is a good thing. And that has the fact that he has sold his soul has enabled him to be in the room doing things that I think are genuinely important to Marco and that he does believe. I think he's also, he's a poor kid from West Miami And I think for him, the idea of having his own plane and being at state dinners and being at Mar-a-Lago and being there in the center of things is just very appealing. But remember who Marco Rubio is. Marco Rubio is a elected official who basically owed his career, a great part of it. He was the first speaker of the Cuban-American speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, legislature. He owed everything to Jeb Bush. Marco's very talented, very eloquent, very smart, very hardworking. Out of that sorry bunch that surrounds Trump, he is by far the most qualified, which I understand is not a high bar, but he is the most qualified.
Right.
But this is the guy who owed everything to Jeb Bush, had said he'd never run against Jeb Bush, and then ran against Jeb Bush for president. So it's quite consistent with Marco to do what's best for Marco. And whether it's getting reelected to the Senate, if he had stayed in the Senate, or getting appointed as a Secretary of State, in order to do either of those things, he would have had to kiss Trump's ass. Because if Trump doesn't endorse you in a Republican primary and endorses somebody running against you, you'll probably lose. Ask Dan Crenshaw.
Right. So I hear from people that go to Mar-a-Lago that Trump spends a lot of time going around Mar-a-Lago when he's talking to people at the tables and they're having dinner saying, what do you think of Marco? Marco's doing great, isn't he? What do you think of Marco? Is Marco at the moment the most likely person to take over from Donald Trump, do you think? Or do you think J.D. Vance stands a chance?
I definitely think the Republican base, the MAGA base, likes J.D. Vance. I think that is their guy. I think J.D. Vance intends to run. He's given every indication. You see what he's doing with people like, trying to take up the mantle after Charlie Kirk, really become close and supportive of the widow, Erica Kirk, and, it's mutual. And Marco has said that he wouldn't run against J.D. Vance, but I'm old enough to remember when he said he wouldn't run against Jeb Bush. So don't hold your breath.
Right. Do you think between the two of them, who do you think would be most likely to get the nomination?
Listen, I think J.D. Vance is lining everything up behind him. But at the end of the day, whatever Donald Trump decides is going to, I think, determine this. Whether I like it or not, the truth is Donald Trump makes or breaks Republican primaries right now. And there is no indication that the next 2 or 3 years that's going to change. I think the reason he likes Marco is because Marco is effective and efficient and knows his stuff. And so, here's Trump surrounded by a bunch of nincompoops, right? By Pam Bondi. I mean, listen, I like Pam Bondi. Like I said to you, we were very friendly when she was in Florida. But I wouldn't hire Pam Bondi to defend me from a traffic ticket.
Would you? What do you think of how she's handled the Epstein files?
I think it's disgusting. I don't know how Pam can live with herself. Knowing, by the way, I don't know how Merrick Garland can live with himself either. That's one of the things we have to remember and be fair about, and that really just kills me. These Epstein survivors, these women were failed not by the Trump administration, but by 4 different administrations. It was under George W. Bush that Alex Acosta was U.S. Attorney of South Florida and brokered that sweetest of the sweetheart deals with Epstein that allowed him to then, 13 months later, despite being registered as a sex offender, continue molesting girls, raping girls, and living his life like if he was some sort of elite VIP surrounded by powerful people. And, Obama was then president. And then we have had 4 different administrations, Trump, Biden. Yes, I fault Merrick Garland. How different would it have been had Merrick Garland released all of these files instead of it being Pam Bondi?
Why did it take so long for it to become a head of steam that the Department of Justice felt pushed into releasing them?
Two things I would say to you. On the Merrick Garland of it all, I think Merrick Garland was extremely preoccupied with Merrick Garland's reputation. I think he didn't want to be seen as being politicized. I think that's the reason that he prosecuted Hunter Biden. I think that's the reason that he appointed a special counsel to investigate Joe Biden over the classified issues. And I think that's the reason he wasn't more proactive and quick regarding Epstein, because of the fear that there would be something regarding Donald Trump or other Republicans there and that he would be seen as political. Pam Bondi, what's the steam? Frankly, let's give credit to where credit is due. It's been MAGA. It's been the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Boeberts and the MAGA blogosphere and podcasters who never let it go. It was MAGA who made this into a campaign issue. In 2024, it was MAGA who never let go of it. It was MAGA Republican women, Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who defied Donald Trump and voted to require the release of these files. Let's remember Lauren Boebert, who was voted with Trump practically 100% of the time, was taken into the Situation Room and bullied to change her vote. That is how much Trump did not want this released. And so I'm disgusted with all of them. I'm disgusted with Pam Bondi. I'm disgusted with Merrick Garland. I'm disgusted with Alex Acosta, who I knew from Miami as well. At one point, Alex Acosta, after the Epstein thing, after being U.S. attorney, he was the dean of the Florida International University Law School. Alex Acosta served in Trump's first administration as Secretary of Labor, as we all remember, and he was barely questioned about the Epstein deal. It was like a nothing burger. Ironically enough, in my view, it wasn't until Trump gets elected, and then as a reaction to that, there is a Me Too movement and a Time's Up, which we saw in the files, Epstein was obsessed with and wanting to thwart.
Well, and constantly trying to sort of create little groups of men where they all got together and just dissed it. Right, because they all thought it was ridiculous and they all knew they were guilty.
But it wasn't until that happened, until Trump gets elected, there's a Me Too movement that I think the Epstein survivors, had the ability, the thought that they could be believed and that they had a voice,
right,
and that they lost the fear. And then it's the Julie K. Brown expose and the Miami Herald. To me, all of those things are connected. The Trump election, the Me Too movement, the expose in the Miami Herald where the survivors spoke, so many of them, and then where we are.
Right, because we had Conchita Sarnoff in the Daily Beast writing about the Epstein situation way before Julie K. Brown did. It just didn't get any momentum. It didn't pick up steam.
And there were people who tried to write about it, and those stories were stopped. There were stories that were stopped. I think people were afraid of very powerful men and what they can do to you. They can sue you. They can do this. They can, they can put all sorts of. He had all the
He had all the tools,
luxuries that come with power. And I think we have learned through the Epstein case. Here in America, we love to tell ourselves everybody's equal under the eyes of the law. Bullshit. Jeffrey Epstein was not equal. You think that if that had been some poor Latino in Hialeah, Florida, or some, poor black guy or some poor white guy, you think he wouldn't have served his entire life in jail for sexually assaulting and raping? He had over 1,000 victims. Would somebody else have been able to get away with that? And, and I was telling you, I think we have given a pass to so many, particularly men, powerful men, people that we admired, or I can tell you I admired. I admired Bill Clinton. I admired Bill Gates.
Why do you think Bill Gates was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein? Bill Gates, at one point the second richest man in the world. What on earth would Bill Gates need from Jeffrey Epstein that he couldn't get from someone else?
Well, First, I think we shouldn't underestimate Epstein's ability to weave a web of power and influence and just, give himself that aura of that normalized what he was doing.
But Bill Gates was hanging out with all these other
Can I tell you something?
billionaires.
Always be careful with the nerds. Because all of those nerds,
Right.
they never fucked the cheerleader.
Right.
They were never the popular guy at the prom. They never had, and so I think, I think that's why Epstein hung around in so many tech conferences and science conferences and longevity stuff, because all of those scientists and technical nerds, and not only was he getting information for investments and things, but he was also always weaving this web of, okay, if I surround myself by these powerful people, then these other powerful people will want to be around me and think that it's okay despite what I've done. And I also think that until Me Too happened, most people just kind of shrugged. It was all you got was a shrug when you heard of older guy, a powerful older guy, messing around with a young girl. I think,
It was just the sort of natural law of things.
The Lolita. Oh, it's the Lolita syndrome. It's okay. I think a lot of people thought that any post-pubescent girl, that once they were post-pubescent, they were fair game.
Right. So let me ask you about another.
Don't you?
Yeah, I do think that. And I think through the lens of Me Too, people have realised, I think women have understood their position differently. But let me ask you about another sexual transaction that's been going on in plain sight, that's finally caught up with Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski. This was an open secret in Washington, big open secret in the Republican Party. What do you think of their relationship? The transformation of Kristi Noem is an interesting thing.
Joanna, the fact that she may have been fucking Corey Lewandowski is the least of my issues with Kristi Noem. Is the fact that she fucked the Constitution, that she fucked the Latino and immigrant community, that she fucked the country that I worry about. It's the fact that she was the leader of DHS as they killed and shot U.S. citizens. It is the fact that she led that department when there were almost 4,000 children detained, that at the same time that the government was shut down and TSA agents weren't getting paid, she was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on an ad campaign. I mean, there's
which
many...
some of her colleagues got money from too, right? Let's not forget that this was not just her spending the money on the ad campaign. There was commission coming off the top.
First, the ad campaign itself is so ridiculous, and I want people to go look at the ads, right? Because she's on a horse, all made up. I don't know anybody who goes on a horse looking like that. But okay, that day she was in Cowboy Barbie costume. God, she loves a costume.
Yep.
But she's doing this big ad costing hundreds of millions of dollars where she's on a horse in Mount Rushmore in telling immigrants not to come to the United States. I'm pretty sure that the people in El Salvador and Guatemala and Mexico and Nicaragua and Venezuela and Afghanistan and God knows where else that she was talking to don't speak English.
Good point.
And are not watching this ad. So this was nothing but a vanity project. This was not an ad who was this ad intended for? Really? Potential undocumented immigrants coming into this country? That is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard.
So who is it aimed at? Is this about her run for 2028?
Yeah, I think she saw herself as a potential contender, and I think she is a vain woman who loved to cosplay different characters, and she just loved the entire thing about the lashes and the extensions and the makeup and being on TV and the all of that.
And
She
the
loved
plane
that.
and the plane, the luxury jet that she flew around with Corey Lewandowski. And we should point out
It
they
would have
both
cost her
denied
less
they've had
money
an
if she
affair.
had, if she had produced her own version of Lady Macbeth and gone off Broadway somewhere. She could have gotten all sorts of costumes, period costumes then.
It's astonishing to me that she spent $250 million on that ad campaign. It's just crazy. And it took one of the Republican senators in John Kennedy to ask her the killer question, did Donald Trump know about this? And her clearly obfuscating and going, yes, he knew. And then...
Do you think John Kennedy asked that question in coordination with Trump in the White House?
Yeah, of course.
Or do you think it was completely out of...
No, I think he led her to drink. I think he led her very gently, question by question, to the point where she had zero wriggle room. And that was the moment where Trump realized this was terrible for Trump. I'm sure he did know about the campaign, though.
Well, the lethal blow is when Senator John Kennedy asks her, did Trump know about this? Did you talk about this with Trump? And she said, yes. And he was supportive of it, which Trump alleges is a lie. I actually believe him because I don't think he'd be cool with a $250,000 ad campaign that wasn't about him. But part of me, most of me thinks that this was planted, this question and the way it was planted by somebody at the White House who realized what a drag and an albatross she is around their necks. We just heard this week that the White House is instructing Republicans running for election this November to stop talking about mass deportations.
Right, because they know how bad it's been. Of course, they give her the face saver of she's going to be part of a new group that deals with South America. Oh. Do you think she sat there?
What have we done in Latin America?
Well,
to deserve the scour of Kristi Noem.
But do you think
I will say, though, I think she's going to get such great photo ops.
She will.
Can you imagine her in Brazil?
Of course.
Like she's playing Carmen Miranda with bananas and pineapples on her head. I mean.
Right. And she'll go full explorer in Patagonia. Right?
Oh, Dora the Explorer?
Dora the Explorer. But do you think, so
do you
now
think she brings Corey Lewandowski with her?
I don't think, well, she won't be useful to Corey anymore, will she? Won't he move on to someone else? And do you remember when she got her bag stolen? I was going to say...
It wasn't a Mexican restaurant.
It wasn't a Mexican restaurant. No, it was a burger. It was a burger place.
Was she and her Rolex, remember?
That's right. And didn't she have a ton of cash too?
Yeah, the question somebody should be asking and investigating is, since she was awarding all of these multi-million-dollar contracts to cronies... what was she getting in exchange, if anything? That, to me, is a legitimate question because she seemed to be living pretty high on the hog.
Yep, high on the hog. Although her husband has Brian, spelt with a Y.
Horns coming out of his head?
Well, his family say that 20 years ago he realized he had a calling from God, that his calling was to support Kristi Noem in her pursuit of power. So that's why they're still together, because as you point out, the relationship with Corey has been going on for some time. We are led to believe, though they both deny it. All right. So I have another question for you. Trump's health. What do we think?
We think there's obviously something going on there, right? I mean, it's not, you don't need to be a trained doctor, which I'm not, to see the size of his ankles, to see the bruises on his hands, to see that the latest thing, that scab hole thing going on in his neck, to see the obvious deterioration, mental deterioration, and know that there's something going on there, but we're never going to know. They're never going to tell us, right? But if it had been Biden, the Republicans would be screaming holy murder right now. And I do think that at some point, it's not going to be now because this Congress is incapable of something like that. But there's so many things that where Trump has shown the weaknesses of this system, and that if we actually had a Congress with a spine, they would do something about it. Whether it's transparency, in the candidates and certainly president's health and finances. Right? We've still not seen
his tax
returns. The tightening the loopholes on the grifting by families. But of course, that would mean that Congress would have to do something about all of the dumb nephews and children of congressmen and senators who have phantom lobbying jobs or consulting jobs with companies benefiting from access to their fathers or mothers. So that's not going to happen, but that should happen. So, we have seen the conflict of interest, the grifting, the violation of the Hatch Act. It's just one thing after another where, again, this Congress, the Republican leadership in Congress has ceded their duty to provide oversight and to be a check and a balance on the executive, which is why I hope and think that the American people are going to provide that check and balance by voting them out in November.
And it feels like we're already in the run-up to the midterms, doesn't it? So I'm very curious. You are a well-known Republican, I guess operative is the right word, in Florida. Are you just banned from everything now? Does anybody talk to you anymore? What happens when you run across Marco Rubio or Pam Bondi? Do you ever see them? Do you ever come across them?
Well, no, I haven't seen them. I think the last time I saw Marco in person was about a year ago when we both attended the funeral of a former Republican congressman, Lincoln Diaz-Balart. His brother is serving in Congress now, Mario Diaz-Balart. And Lincoln Diaz-Balart, his other brother is with MSNBC or MS Now, and now he's stayed with NBC, Jose Diaz-Balart. But Marco was at Lincoln Diaz-Balart's funeral, and I was at Lincoln Diaz-Balart's funeral. Lincoln was a Republican but he was like a brother to me. What happened? Well, I'm in Miami, and a lot of times I run into people who were friends of mine, not just elected officials, but just, people who are staunch Republicans. They'll call me a communist, or they'll turn their face at me. I've lost friendships over it, whatever. It's the world we live in now. And if a friendship is defined by political agreements or disagreements, then it's not much of a friendship. I've learned to live with it at this point, and it is what it is. There was a time in this country, and if you're old enough, you remember this, when people could have vocal, strong, loud disagreements on politics and still be friends. I remember being on CNN with Donna Brazile during the Obama administration and me being incredibly critical of some of the things Barack Obama was doing, and Donna defending them. We were having debates on TV, and afterwards we'd go and have oysters and wine at the local watering hole. Donna Brazile is like the only person. I think I'm the only person who can match Donna, oyster for oyster and drink for drink. That's pretty much a thing of the past these days. Trump made it so that you can't even be a Republican who disagrees with Trump and be at the same dinner table with Trumpers. It's just become incredibly difficult. We've become polarized in a way that I never imagined we could be.
So, final question. You grew up in Nicaragua. You experienced dictatorship from both sides, actually, from Somoza on the right and then Ortega on the left. Do you think America under Donald Trump is actually a dictatorship at this point? Are there things that structurally worry you about the future of democracy in America?
Yes. Do I think it's a dictatorship? No, because we still have mostly independence in the courts. And I think they have been doing their part in trying to keep democracy alive. I think that our system of checks and balances was not designed when the founding fathers were drawing it up. It was not designed to have somebody that's got the dictatorial tendencies that Donald Trump does. I take the word dictatorship very seriously. It's not something I throw around lightly because I've lived
Right, that's why I'm asking.
under Ortega. I was very small when Somoza was in power. When the revolution happened in Nicaragua, I was 8 years old. But I've lived in Miami my entire life, surrounded by Venezuelans and Cubans who fled dictatorship and Haitians who have fled dictatorship. So are there things that are dictatorial-like, that are reminiscent? Yeah, when you see the attacks on the free press, when you see the attacks on institutions like universities, when you see the weaponization of government against political opponents like James Comey, yes, when you see the enrichment of the person in power and his family, those are all things when you see that dictators do. When you see Donald Trump trying to lie and change election results and stay in power through violence, which was January 6th. That's what Maduro did in Venezuela. He lost that election to Maria Corina Machado, that poor woman who gave Donald Trump her
Nobel Peace Prize. What was she thinking?
If I was her, I'd be at the White House knocking down that gate, asking for my medal back. Because every time anybody puts a mic in front of him, he starts talking about how great Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, who was part and parcel of every human rights violation that regime perpetrated on the Venezuelan people. But all Trump can do is talk about how great she is, how wonderful it is to work with her, how wonderful a person she is, how it's a great collaboration. In the meantime, he's got Maria Corina Machado's Peace Prize medal hanging in the White House somewhere, and he keeps throwing that poor woman under the bus. He doesn't even mention her name.
Right. Well, this is why you can't give in to bullies, right? The minute you give in to them or the minute you suck up to them, they just want more.
That part.
All right, so let me ask you something. You were a vociferous defender of Jimmy Kimmel when his show was suspended, and you were very powerful on The View. There were stories that Bob Iger, the CEO of ABC, had come to one side and said, hey, you guys have to lay off Trump. You have to be easier. And he'd in particular taken you off to one side. What was that moment like?
Well, I'm not going to talk about private conversations with Bob Iger or any of the executives. I can tell you this much. The View viewership is incredibly loyal. And I think the reason the show works, and we are now on the 29th season, it was created by Barbara Walters. We're turning 30 next year.
Congrats.
Is because they expect from the hosts on their authenticity and transparency, and they expect us to take on some very tough, hot topics and discuss them honestly. If we don't, they know that. If we change, they know that. The show is right now #1 daytime talk show in America. And I think it's because of that formula and because that formula hasn't changed. So we continue to do what we do. If you tune in every day, we are talking about the abuses of power and calling them out and giving different perspectives on what's happening. We all see the efforts by the Trump administration to muscle anybody or any institution, any company that is critical of him. They may try, but they haven't muscled the women of The View yet. And, I think we take our responsibility to be accurate, to be truthful, to be engaged very seriously. And I consider it a privilege to have that kind of national platform, because a lot of people get their news from from The View. A lot of people are not tuning in to CNN or MS. I keep saying it wrong. What the hell is it called now?
MS Now.
24 hours a day, or not reading the New York Times. A lot. We've seen that local newspapers have taken such a hit lately. There's less and less local newspaper coverage of big national stories because of lack of resources and support. So I take that job very seriously. We all do, and we continue doing what we've been doing for 29 years.
Well, congratulations on reaching your 30th anniversary. That's an extraordinary achievement in television, and it's fantastic to talk to you. I mean, it's so liberating to hear someone just feel free to say what they think. And I love your line about Kristi Noem, that you don't care if she fucked Lewandowski, you care if she fucked the country. Ana Navarro,
that's part of the reason,
very good line.
Let me tell you this, that's
very
part of the
good
reason
line.
Why I started this new podcast, Bleep.
Right.
Because those things I can't say on TV.
Right.
Not because somebody's telling me not to say them, but because they're an FCC violation at 11 a.m. in the morning. So I actually have gotten bleeped with some on network TV with some frequency. And then I tried to curse in Spanish and thought they won't know what I'm saying. Maybe, but they've kind of caught on to me. So at this point, if I say anything in Spanish, if I say queso, they will bleep me out just to be on the safe side. And so the reason that I named the podcast Bleep is because it's a place where we can be uncensored, unfiltered, unbleeped, and just talk truthfully. And I think this new podcast space is so refreshing because it is so free.
Well, and what's fun about watching Bleep is you're sitting there in your kind of comfy chair. You've sometimes got a glass of something. You're raising your glass. You've got cha-cha on there. And you look like you're having fun. You're chatting away. You've got opinions on everything, which is what makes great podcasting.
What I don't have opinions on? I need to find some opinions on. I need to have an opinion on Timothée Chalamet. I don't even know how to say his name.
You really don't.
And the opera and the ballet thing. Do you have an opinion on that?
On the what?
Do you not know
about this?
What's the last
bit? What's the last bit?
Opera and ballet? Do you
know yeah, I do. I do know that. And he's sort of right, which is why, nobody goes to see the opera anymore. Or the people that do.
I will tell you this. I was a three tenors groupie at a point. I went to see the three tenors.
But what happened to the three tenors?
Pavarotti's dead.
Right, but
Jose Carreras, I think, is almost dead. Right?
And the other one got Me Too'd.
Right.
Right, Placido. Unfortunately, who I saw at La Scala and who was fantastic. I also was a three tenors girl, and I don't mind going to the opera, but I'm always struck when I do go to the opera how old the audience is. So maybe it's something that we all come to later in life. You turn 70, you get a membership to the opera, but I think people are going to be on YouTube watching Bleep instead.
I hope so. I hope podcasting is not a dead art.
I think it's just beginning. I think,
I do too.
Cha-Cha, you should have your own podcast. You could have a dog podcast. You could interview my dog. Cha-Cha looks strangely at home in a podcast studio.
Cha-Cha's strangely at home anywhere. She's a very comfortable dog.
Yeah, very sweet dog.
She lives, in my next life, I want to come back as Cha-Cha. I want to be carried around everywhere. I want somebody to pay for every morsel of food that I eat. I want to be loved and pampered and go everywhere.
And she doesn't need extensions. Anna, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming in. So much fun. How great to have Ana Navarro's opinions unbleeped. Unbleeped is what she should have called her podcast. Not filtered by the networks, but just raw Navarro-isms, which give us an insight into what she really thinks about the madness that's going on. Anyway, if you have been, thank you for joining us. Leave us a comment on what you think about Anna's opinions. Leave us a comment about Cha-Cha, my latest obsession. And don't forget to join the Daily Beast community. Subscribe if you haven't done. Sign up for the Daily Beast, where we keep you up to date moment by moment with everything that's going on. Pete Hegseth's latest vanities, what else he's been spending money on at the Pentagon. And don't forget to listen to Ana Navarro's podcast. It's super fun. And I'm looking forward to having her back on to talk about, well, everything that's going on. And as our First Lady would have us say, don't forget, be beast. So the good news is we have so many B-Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks to our production team, Devon Rogerino, Ryan Murray, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, Neil Rosenhaus.